So what are y'all's favorite books from the last 10 or so years? Not manga, not anything else. What are some of your favorite comic books or comic book runs from the last 10 years? Because one of the things that I've brought up before is a lot of people are talking about comics, they're talking about these wars in the culture, and they're talking about the fight for this and the fight for this, and they're selling you the independent books. But what they're not talking about are the books that are coming out and being put on the shelves. And I'm really interested in that because if those books are still making it to shelves, that's because people are still buying them. They're not losing money on all of them. You guys see what I'm saying? They may not be selling what they used to, but somebody's buying these books. Somebody's buying the books that they're selling and making their deals to Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble would not be making deals with DC Comics, Marvel Comics, if they were losing money on them. So somebody, somewhere, some people are still buying these books. I want to know what they're buying. Because Barnes & Noble, they have Dark Knights of Steel on the wall, and you get all these books from DC, these Elseworlds titles that I have very little interest in. It seems like the writer and the artist team have a lot of fun on them. I'm not that interested in those stories, but I reread some of the stories, some of the more popular stories from the last 10 years, a lot from Scott Snyder in particular, and I don't want this video to come off like I'm picking on him. I'm absolutely not. The guy's doing his independent scene, he's creating his own characters, and I have full respect for that. But I will be talking a lot about his books in this video, and I'm rereading these. He had a Justice League run after he got off of Batman, whenever he did Dark Knight's Metal. And what I'm noticing about a lot of these writers and a lot of these stories from the last 10 or so years, even you could say as far back as about 20 years now, a lot of them feel like fan fiction. A lot of them feel like a fan writing Batman. Take Dark Knight's Metal, for instance. What if Batman had this cool coat like he was in a heavy metal rock band and there were guitars, and Wonder Woman had a chainsaw, and it's all these very pretty things to put on a cover. But then I read the stories and they were so convoluted and almost dry, to the point where I would read it issue to issue. I was keeping up with that and I had no idea what was happening. And that's in part because DC wanted him to set this up, and there was this with Doomsday Clock, and even Doomsday Clock, you read that one and that was this big event, and Superman might die or the universe might get destroyed. None of that happened at the end. What happened is the universe revolved around Superman, and Superman is the key to all these different universes, and Dr. Manhattan learned the power of friendship and he became a real boy again. And then nothing happened. And then nothing happened. And I remember reading the last issue of Doomsday Clock finally after 2 years of waiting for Doomsday Clock to come out, and all these hiatuses that they had because Jeff Johns needed to spend more time with his family. Buddy, if you would have just finished the book in a year, you could have been an entire year. That's besides the point. I read that last issue, and you got to the point where Superman was coming in and he's going to punch Dr. Manhattan in the face and the universe is going to get destroyed, and it did. And it did. And I'll give him that. He destroyed the universe for about 5 seconds. And then you get this very long-winded thing about in every universe there's a Superman, and in those universes, the universes revolve around Superman, and he learns the power of friendship, he's going to be a real boy, yada, yada, yada. He returns to the Watchmen universe, and you get these cool splash pages of ensemble superheroes that are all coming out, and it's this big kumbaya, everybody celebrate, hold hands, we're all good, and then nothing happens. Nothing happened. Nothing happened at the end of it. You have Dark Knight's Metal by Scott Snyder, and then nothing happened at the end of that. Scott Snyder left, actually, at the end of that. You have Scott Snyder's run on Justice League, and he introduced all these mechs and all these anime-type fights. There were some good moments, to be fair. Like I said, I'm not doing this to pick on anybody in particular, but you have these good moments in it, but you also have these real cheesy power of friendship anime moments. With Jeff Johns, it seems like Jeff Johns tripped over himself on Doomsday Clock because he really, really wanted to be Alan Moore. Your boy Zach made a real cool video title regarding the end of Doomsday Clock. He said, Jeff Johns is no Alan Moore, but Alan Moore is no Jeff Johns. And the point he was trying to make is get out of your own way, just be yourself doing this book, and you would have done a much more phenomenal job than if you kept on trying to be Alan Moore. And that's one of the lessons that people need to unlearn in comic books is don't be like Alan Moore. Don't be Alan Moore. That's the worst thing that you could do. The best thing you could do is see what he did well and build on it. Don't be Alan Moore. Alan Moore doesn't want to be Alan. Have you heard what Alan Moore says about his own work? Don't be Alan Moore. That's no disrespect to Alan Moore. That's just saying be you, which is the cheesiest advice you can get. But Doomsday Clock. The idea is fan fiction. The Watchmen universe and the DC universe, they were never supposed to be together. Why? It just doesn't work. Rorschach doesn't belong here. Comedian doesn't belong here. These characters get smoked by the DC characters. You have the rehash of a lot of the things that happened in Watchmen, where Ozymandias was there and he had all the TVs on the wall. Which, by the way, that was a very 70s, 80s idea in the first one. All the TVs on the wall and these plans that are unfolding. It just doesn't work. All of a sudden, you put these commentaries on superheroes with actual superheroes, and it just melts apart. They tried to make it geopolitical the same way Watchmen was. That Vladimir Putin was in it, and Vladimir Putin made his own superheroes to combat the United States superheroes, and they got into this weird conflict, and there might have been nukes. Batman stopped nukes from happening. There were some cool moments here and there, but then the first 6 issues was just set up, and you guys know how I feel. What? You can't set up. You can set up something, but if you're going to set something up, have a punchline. Don't make the punchline be more setup, because then you just lose me. And you lose a lot of readers, and as it happens, it lost a lot of readers as it went on. And I just wonder why. You'll notice, I just I have all these questions asked. Why do comic books feel like this? Well, I think I have an answer. And I stole this talking point from another channel, but the answer to that could be as simple as, when I read Jack Kirby, and you're going to hear me talk about him a lot, but when I read Jack Kirby books, and you hear, well, where did Jack Kirby get Jack Kirby's ideas from? Well, he got it from the Bible, and he got it from the Odyssey, and he got it from all these classic things in literature. He got it from these old movies. He got it from Tales from the War, real lived experiences. And so he created all these wonderful characters. Well, let's ask these guys where they're getting their ideas from. Well, I got it from Alan Moore. And I got it, I remember reading comics when I was a kid. And you start to notice this pattern. Well, you didn't read classic literature. You didn't have an ingrained interest in telling great stories. You had an interest in telling Batman stories, which isn't inherently bad, but when paired with nothing else, that's how you get fan fiction. Anybody on Tumblr, anybody on Reddit, anybody on any social media platform could write a fan fiction. Anybody could say, what if Wonder Woman had a chainsaw? What if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? So much so there was a series called What If at Marvel that's been pretty mediocre in the last 10 years because they're kind of stuck on ideas. Remember the What If Miles Morales ... is Thor, is Iron Man, is Captain America? Remember that series and how well that one went? I say with sarcasm. So you have these guys that kind of are writing fan fiction. And that leads to disinterest from the fans, because then you don't get the same kind of storytelling as you would get for people who want to tell good stories with the character. And you're also strangled to these characters. You're tied to these characters. You can't really introduce new ones. Everybody in comic books wants to retell the origin story. This is my telling of his first year. You have the 0 year. You have Tom King's prequel to Batman. And you have every writer left and right rebooting, recreating, rehashing these origin stories. And it gets to the point where you have people that don't take comic books seriously. And you have the comic book writers who want them to be taken seriously, yet they cannot for 2 seconds take themselves seriously. When they're selling all their properties to TV shows and movies, they don't want to be comics, they want to be TV shows and movies. So how can I respect your medium if you yourself don't respect it enough to stand on it? Well, that's a really interesting question, and that's a little off topic, but if all you're writing is fan fiction, then of course you can only take it so far. And what I've noticed in comic books, and really sticking to these characters, and why I've drifted a bit from the mainstream comic books, DC and Marvel, is because what I'm finding artistically is I can't draw these characters and portray these characters in a light that they have not been portrayed before, much less can I do it better than the way it's been done before. So, really in comic books, the way that we're all approaching these comic books, the way that we're approaching these characters, is how can I do a better rehash than that guy? We're all fighting to be the best rehash instead of the best original idea. And that's kind of the problem. Fan fiction is great. There's nothing wrong with it. I think that fan fiction is telling of a healthy fan base for your work. Like I said, your work is only as valuable as long as people are talking about it. as long as people are interested, as long as there are conversations happening about the work. But when your writers are writing fan fiction for you professionally, and you don't really have editorial points that say, hey, wait a minute, maybe you should write it like this. I see your idea, but let's refine it just a little bit. You always have to remember, what separates the best from the rest is not a huge skill gap. It's about this much. So when you look at these books and you think, well, these seem a whole lot like fanfiction, well, they are, unfortunately. And again, that's not me poking at anybody. That's not me saying, this guy sucks, this guy sucks. I'm saying this because I want to fix it. I want the best comic books to be on the market. Whether that be the independent scene or the Batman Superman scene. It doesn't make a difference. Just make good comic books. And I think we have to get away from making the fan fiction before we can start making good books again.